morning, Pilgrims. So today, now our Paul in Lockdown series, we're going to be looking at Philippians 1:18b to 21. Paul writes from this prison in Rome, he says, "Yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." So Paul here, we've talked about how he's been rejoicing right back in the first three verses because of his mates in Philippi when he remembers them. He's rejoiced just before because Christ is being preached everywhere, whether from good motives or bad motives, and he's continuing to rejoice here. Why? Paul's rejoicing because he knows he can't lose. And one of the things I really want you to pick up today is how connected Paul saw all of this. We talked about this last week, how Paul saw love, knowledge, growth, all in Christ. And Paul goes even wider, just seeing all things as pointing to Christ, right? So in verse 19 where he says, "I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance." See, he's in lockdown, remember. He's imprisoned for following Jesus. But remember, as we've talked about, he sees himself as actually free, but enchained to Jesus. The lockdown isn't his true reality. And Paul's rejoicing because he knows he will be delivered. And at first glance, you might think this is about Paul saying, "I'm stoked, I'm going to be set free from prison." Paul's rejoicing because he knows he's going to be let go. Perhaps you've felt the same, hoping and putting your joy in that time when this lockdown here is over. But Paul's joy here isn't about being delivered from prison. His joy, as we'll soon see, is about being delivered from sin. And his being saved, it's about the same salvation that perhaps you've experienced. That's what he is rejoicing in. He's rejoicing that all the things that have happened to him are all about his experience of salvation. And here's the cool thing, and this is where we're talking about the connection. Paul sees his mates in Philippi, that church, their prayers as part of that. Paul here combines his trust in Jesus with his recognition that God also works through prayers. So Paul is saying, your prayers in Philippi actually encourage me in my life here. God's also given me his very Spirit of Jesus in lockdown. So prayer and Spirit are connected as I'm experiencing this salvation, the salvation that has come to me, that is coming and is here. I'm experiencing this right now. And see, in verse 20, this is how we know Paul's not talking about his hope as being set free. Because in verse 20, he says, "I eagerly expect and hope that I'll in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death." See, he says, I might live or I might die. He's not saying he's going to be set free. But Paul goes, regardless of whether I live or die here, I want to have the courage to live for Jesus and the courage to die for Jesus. And he goes, I know I'm not going to be ashamed, which means he's saying, I know I'm not going to be disappointed by Jesus. And I want to make Jesus, I love this little phrase, he says, I want to make Jesus known through my body. Do you hear that? He says, Christ will be exalted in my body. And that's a weird phrase, but I actually find it really encouraging because Paul is recognizing that he has a body. Great, well done, Paul, right? But what he's saying is following Jesus is about following Jesus as a person with a body. It's about all of life. This is not just about spiritual when perhaps we're worshiping or praying. This is about every single time. This is about, for example, exalting Christ when I'm tired, when I'm bored, when I'm frustrated, when I'm full of unmet sexual desire, when I'm hungry, when I'm in lockdown. He's saying in all of these times with these bodily feelings, I want to exalt Christ with my body. See, we're so aware of our bodies in lockdown, aren't we? Perhaps you've experienced an increase in boredom. Perhaps you've experienced an increase in lust. Who knows? And Paul says here, I want to exalt Christ in my body through all these. So regardless of how I'm feeling, I want my body to be making Jesus famous. So for Paul, it's probably bigger than what he's experiencing. He's probably being beaten and he's got the threat of execution hanging over him as well. But he's saying, if I'm executed, I want it to be a gospel execution. I want everyone to know about Jesus as it happens. Isn't this awesome? And in the very end, he says that little phrase, for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Now it's interesting, back then a kind of common saying people would say is to live is gain and to die is Christ, right? The typical belief might be, hey, it's really great to live now, do what you can, make the most of this life, and then when you die you get Christ, which kind of makes sense. But Paul flips it and he says, I have Christ now. To live is Christ. My life now is all about Christ. But when I die, I gain more. I get to see Jesus. I get to know him intimately. See, what I love about this is Paul flips it. He's saying this life is not about me. This life is not about my gain. It's not about you. That's what happens in death. That's when you get the gain. This life here is all about Jesus Christ. True joy is found when I realize and when you realize that this life is not about me and you, and it's not about our gain. It's about Christ and following him. Understanding where he's calling you to. Is he calling you to business? Is he calling you to be a parent? Is he calling you to be an academic? Is he calling you to plant a church or to start a home group or to be worshipping him through some of the skills he's given you or preaching in this? Regardless, Paul's saying this is all for Christ. When you die, you'll have true gain, but when you're living, it is for Christ. So there's a challenge here in lockdown to be sensing what is it that God is calling you to? And then doing that for Christ. So knowing that in each moment, for you to live as Christ, and for you to die as gain.